So welcome and thank you for being here. Hi, Ann.
Hi.
I have handouts for you. My name is Mark Bernstein. I'm the Regional Growth Consultant for the Central East Regional Group. My home congregation is the UU Church of Delaware County in Media, Pennsylvania, which is right outside Philadelphia. I'm originally from New York. I grew up on Long Island, but I've been living in the Philadelphia area for a really long time, over 30 years. We have some handouts up here, if you could take one of each. Before I started working for the UUA about 4 years ago, I made my career in the field of disabilities. And I've worked primarily with folks with cognitive disabilities and physical disabilities, but I've also had contact folks that were classified as being duly diagnosed, people with mental health issues as well. So when the person at the UUA who was responsible for issues related to disabilities left that position, I was asked by the UUA to serve as a liaison to Equal Access, which is an organization, a group of folks primarily with disabilities and allies who are Unitarian Universalists and who are advocating for greater inclusion of people with disabilities in congregations. So I'm the liaison to that Equal Access group. If you're not a member of Equal Access, on the resource page is their website, equalaccess.org. You can become a member of Equal Access. We have about 150, 175 members, and we're trying to increase our numbers. We have a relationship with the UUA that is collegial and supportive, and we're offering ideas and advice to the Unitarian Universalist Association. The last thing that we did, we took a position on mental health, which we talked to the UUA about. The other thing was that the UUA headquarters are moving in Boston to a new building. Some of you may know that. Yeah, it's about time. And we were asked, Equal Access was asked to tour the building and offer input on ways that it can be more accessible. So we had 3 members of Equal Access go, one person who is blind, one person who is deaf, and one person who has mobility issues. And they toured the building with the HR director of the UUA and came up with an extensive list of recommendations. The association won't be able to honor them all because there are some monetary influences that prohibit doing everything. But a lot of the accommodations will happen now because of the influence of Equal Access. So again, if you're not a member, go on the website, check it out, join us. We want to increase our numbers. So that's my interest in the field of disabilities and my connection with the UUA and issues around accessibility and disabilities. I want to hear from you today. I've got information I want to share with you, but I also want to give you the opportunity to share your experiences, to ask questions as well. I want this to be as interactive as possible, but we've only got an hour and 15 minutes, and that's not a lot of time. So I'm going to kind of manage the time and try to balance the presentation of information with giving you the opportunity to share it as well. So these are kind of the opening words for our time together. Our faith calls us to live a spirit of radical hospitality. Only when we are truly open to the wealth of diversity in our world will the inherent worth and dignity of every person be affirmed with a large voice. Let's not rest until all are welcomed into beloved community. Now, this is from the UUA website, but it refers specifically to welcoming congregation. But I'm broadening it and including people that have disabilities as well. So we pride ourselves on being inclusive in our congregations, and I'm going to make the case today that we are making exceptions. And one of those exceptions are people who have disabilities. In many of our congregations, we are locking out people with disabilities. And I want to share with you just a few of the stories that I've gathered along the way that demonstrate that. I'm not used to working with a microphone, so you'll have to forgive me. So this is a story from one of the congregations. Their sanctuary is up a full flight of stairs, and many social events are held down a full flight of stairs. Attending RE can involve several flights of stairs. We've seen folks leave, including a past president whose sister required accommodations. They did make an effort to create a second sanctuary on the first floor with a video feed, but it was hard to change the culture of people feeling free to walk through, making noise, preparing for coffee hour, etc. You can imagine. A formal request for the worship service to be occasionally held on the first floor so everyone could worship together was never granted by the worship committee. Another story. Their sanctuary, the main floor where the sanctuary was located was accessible, but if I wanted to participate in any before or after church activities, it meant I had to go out to my car, get in, load my wheelchair in, then drive down to the lower level, unload my chair, and then re-enter the church. And the bathrooms had handrails in one stall, but no place to turn around, and you couldn't close the stall door with the wheelchair in the stall. Here's another story. Yesterday, I saw an order of service for a church, and prominently displayed on the program was the statement that no food or drink was allowed in the sanctuary, including water. I have often seen no food or drink, but I've never seen no water. I am missing some salivary glands, and I carry a water bottle with me everywhere. If I sat through a 1-hour service without water, my mouth would feel as though it is stuffed with cotton. And still another story. I have cerebral palsy and I drive a scooter. The church has 3 floors, but no elevator, and the prospects for one in the next 4 years appear slim. Still, I enjoy the services and the people I meet, although I sometimes feel my pledge should be cut by 2/3 because I have access to only 1/3 of the building. Good point. Another story. My family and I recently moved to a new community and would very much like to attend the UU Church. It's a large church, but there doesn't seem to be an appropriate place for my 4.5-year-old who has autism to go during the services. The 4-year-old classroom, the classroom for 4-year-olds, is somewhat structured, and he would be disruptive to the other children in that class. He doesn't seem to fit into the 2- or 3-year-old class either. And the last story. When we first started going to church, the accessible entrance was often locked. We reminded them repeatedly to make sure they unlocked it for us and anyone else that needed it. But they were quite defensive about it. It was around the time I was planning to have my twin children dedicated in the church, and the minister basically said to me, "I don't know why you want to have your children dedicated here if you think we are doing such a bad job accommodating you." I went home and cried. Another issue was the assistive listening device. It was great that they had one, but it worked only about 1/3 of the time. I was shoved from person to person about it, and no one would take the time to problem solve about what could be done. Efforts to provide training to volunteer sound engineers were rebuffed. And by the way, I understand that there were some problems with the assistive listening devices here as well in the main room. These are some of the stories that we hear. And we're not going to focus on, woe is us today. But these are the kinds of stories, if they applied to any other marginalized group, we wouldn't tolerate it. As Unitarian Universalists, we'd be serving witness, we'd be marching, we'd be advocating, we'd be standing up. But people with disabilities tend to be invisible, in my opinion, in our Unitarian Universalist congregations. I want to get a sense, as we go through our time together, why you're here. And I suspect that for many of you, it may be preaching to the choir. Maybe not. But you're here because you have an interest in this issue. And I hope that our conversation this afternoon will inspire you to go back and enlist other people to join in advocating for greater rights and opportunities for people with disabilities. What it really comes down to, and the title of this presentation, Victor Hugo wrote, "Being good is easy. What is difficult is being just." It's an issue of fairness. And fairness is important to us as human beings. If we don't feel we're being treated fairly, then we will react in aggressive ways. And I don't necessarily mean physically hurting someone else. We'll leave, we'll react in a negative way. Our relationships will be affected. I want to pause for a moment and give you a demonstration of the power of being put in a position where one feels as if they're not being treated fairly. So this was an experiment that was done at Emory University. And they've done it with several species, but this was done with monkeys. And the researcher will explain this to you, but let me just tell you, in case he talks too fast or you can't hear everything he says. They trained the monkeys to do a simple task. They were given a rock, and then they had to give the rock back. And when they gave the rock back, they got a reward. Initially, the monkeys were trained using cucumbers. Now, apparently monkeys will work for cucumbers, but they're not too crazy about it. I mean, you know, who really is? What monkeys really like are grapes. So as you'll see in this experiment, they've trained the monkey on cucumbers, and then one of the monkeys gets a grape, and you'll see how the other monkey reacts. It's an issue of fairness.
So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is a monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
No way.
So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
And that really is true. It's the basic for the reasons why we protest. If people feel that they're being treated unfairly, then they'll react in aggressive, resistant ways. And it has great implications for us in our congregations. Let me just throw some statistics at you really quickly. The National Organization on Disability, in a study that was done a couple of years ago, concluded that people with disabilities are very likely to say their faith is important to them, but are more likely to not attend services due to accessibility issues. With the aging of the American population and with the aging of people in our congregations, the situation is becoming an increasingly significant factor in worship community vitality. This is also from that study. About 65% of all U.S. residents, both those with and without disabilities, say that their religious faith is very important to them. People with severe disabilities, however they define that, and I don't have that information, are more likely to say their religious faith is very important to them than people with slight disabilities. People with disabilities are less likely than people with disabilities to attend religious services on a regular basis, and the gap between people with and without disabilities in terms of attendance has not closed. In 2004, the first time they did this study, there was a 7% gap between people with and without disabilities in terms of their regular attendance in worship services. In the last study that was done in 2010, that gap hasn't closed. It's still at 7%.
Who is the study from?
National Organization on Disability. So 2010. So they updated their numbers in 2010. So this is a moral issue, it's a justice issue, and it's a growth issue. It's a moral issue, and we can look to other faith traditions. Rabbi Harold Kushner, religion offers community to our lonely human souls. The house of worship represents one place where the barriers fall and we all stand equal before God. The Prophet Muhammad, Allah does not judge according to your bodies and appearances, but he scans your hearts and looks into your deeds. A statement from the U.S. Catholic bishops on persons with disabilities. When we think of persons with disabilities in relation to ministries, we tend automatically to think of doing something for them. We do not reflect that they can do something for us and with us. They have the same duty as all members of the community to do the Lord's work in the world according to their God-given talents and capacities. And the United Church of Christ said Jesus didn't turn people away, and neither do we. It's also a justice issue, and I worked for almost 30 years in the field of disability, fighting for the rights of people with disabilities, and the fight continues. People with disabilities experience inequalities in our society. For example, when they're denied equal access to health care or employment or education or political participation because of their disability. People with disabilities are subject to violations of dignity. For example, when they are subjected to violence, abuse, prejudice, or disrespect because of their disability. And we know that people with disability are more prone to be victims of violence and abuse, both domestic and within the service system that is supposed to be providing services to them. And some people with disability are still denied autonomy. For example, when they are subjected to involuntary sterilization, or when they are confined in institutions against their will, and those institutions still exist, or when they are regarded as legally incompetent because of their disability. So it's a moral issue, it's a justice issue, but it's also a growth issue. Now, granted, this picture is not very subtle, but if we are not being accommodating to people with disabilities, it's like putting two big brawny guys in front of our church and saying you're not welcome here. And some people won't even be able to enter the church in the first place because they may have to climb stairs in order to get into the main entrance. So we don't even know how many people are not coming to our doors because they don't feel that they'll be accommodated. But it's also preventing us from closing the back door. So as our members start to age and they have trouble seeing or hearing, or they have mobility issues and climbing stairs is difficult for them, for many people, rather than saying, I need an accommodation, they'll just start to fade away. So we're both preventing people potentially from becoming Unitarian Universalists, and we're ushering people that are members of our congregations out the back door. So if the moral and the justice issue doesn't work for you, then look at this as a growth issue in order to help your congregation to become stronger, more vital, and larger in numbers. So, on both moral and justice grounds, and as a tool for congregational growth, is this the new frontier for Unitarian Universalism? Is this where we need to be putting our emphasis next? Now, when I raised this question, I did this workshop at another forum, and someone said to me later, but you're assuming that we've conquered all the other frontiers. Anti-racism, anti-oppression, multiculturalism, the immigration issue. I'm not presuming anything. But at least we're aware of the need to tackle those problems. I don't know how aware we are of the need to begin to take concrete steps to better welcome and accommodate people with disabilities in our congregations. Before I forget, Margaret's story reminded me of another horror story, although I don't really want to focus on horror stories. There are some success stories. These stories that I read are stories that people said to me. This is secondhand, but it's on good authority. There was a congregation, a woman who was blind visited it and wanted to join. She called the congregation and said, I can get there on my own. The problem is the bus drops me off across the street from the church. I really need someone to help me across the street. Can you make that work? And she was told, we really don't have anyone that can help you with that. And it's on really good authority. It's so hard to believe, isn't it? We're talking about the whole gamut of people with disabilities, people with visual, auditory, and mobility limitations, people with chemical sensitivities, the invisible disabilities, people with cognitive or intellectual disabilities, people with psychiatric disabilities, mental health issues. I'm going to focus mostly on these first two, but I do have some stuff related to people with intellectual disabilities. And you have, one of your handouts has resources that we've compiled through the UUA and through Equal Access for congregations that want to educate their membership more about mental health issues. My home congregation a couple of years ago had a special service on mental illness, and 3 or 4 members of the congregation volunteered to tell their stories, people with mental illness. And it was, I've been a member for 20 years, that might have been the most powerful worship service I've ever been to. And I know that some other congregations have started doing that as well. People being bold enough, courageous enough to tell their story. There's nothing more powerful than that. So there are barriers to accessibility. And for many congregations, they look at it and they say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. But at least we looked at it. I just want to look at a couple of 3 of the barriers. Religious institutions are exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act and therefore do not have to make physical accommodations. The fact is, while religious institutions are exempt, technically, under Title III of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, they are not exempt under Title I. Now, this isn't going to help most of the congregations. Rochester will see this as relevant. But congregations that employ 15 or more staff need to make modifications to a building to accommodate an employee with a disability, even though they don't have to modify the building to accommodate other members. Isn't that interesting? So Rochester, gentlemen this morning said you have 30 staff. Who's Rochester again? I hate to keep picking on you guys. So that means under ADA that if someone applies for a position and has a disability, you have the responsibility to make a reasonable accommodation in order for them to work there. And the only way you can hire them is if it would prove to be an undue hardship for the congregation. But of course you all are aware of that. In addition, religious institutions receiving federal funds are not exempt under the Rehabilitation Act. Not too many of our congregations receive federal funds, but those that do have to abide by these regulations. Barrier, it costs too much money to make physical changes to the building or its contents. Now granted, if you have to put in an elevator, I mean, that can be really, really expensive. But you know, how often do we think of that as part of a capital campaign? We want a new kitchen. Boy, that'll get people to fork up the money. But an elevator, you know, I've heard congregations say, we don't have anybody who has a physical disability. Why do we need an elevator?
Yeah. That's why.
Fact is, while it may be cost prohibitive to make large structural changes, most accommodations require little or no outlay of money. One study that was done found that the average cost per, not congregation, but per organization to make a needed accommodation was $500. The biggest investment is not in money, but in the effort to find creative ways of enhancing the congregational experience. And the barrier, since we can't make large physical changes to the building or its contents, there is little we can do to make people with disabilities feel welcome, and certainly that's not true. Being aware of the needs of people with disabilities and addressing those needs with respect and compassion is often more important to the individual than implementing physical changes. So we can't be deluded into thinking that the barriers are too great and there's nothing that we can do. I want to share with you some suggestions for people with visual, auditory, and mobility limitations. Some of these you may have already done in your congregations. Some might be really, really feasible to do. Some you may not be able to do right away. So here are a few of them. Cutouts in pews for wheelchairs. Like actually get rid of some of the pews so that people in wheelchairs don't have to see either right up front or all the way in the back. Power-assisted doors. It's one of the things that people with mobility issues most frequently request. After an elevator and a ramp is power-assisted door. Assisted listening devices. And by the way, just to build on what Janet said, if you have questions about assisted listening devices or loop systems and where to go and who's the best, contact me, because I've got a great resource in Equal Access who has given me a lot of information. So it may not be on the UUA website yet. We have to get all that stuff up there. But I've got the latest information. Large print hymnals, but also large print orders of service. A lot of congregations, more and more, are getting large print hymnals. But what about the orders of service? They're usually in 12-point font. And if the copy machine isn't working that well that day, it's kind of faded. Have several large print orders of service available for people who request them. Ramps, lifts or elevators, and accessible bathrooms. And you know, one of the stories that I read, if the bathrooms aren't accessible, people aren't going to come back, or they're going to leave. And accessible parking spots, and put a lot of them, because that gives a message that we are truly welcoming to people with disabilities. Now, if you're an urban church and you don't have a parking lot, don't worry about it. This is a picture from the Center County Congregation in State College, and they have these mats sprinkled throughout the sanctuary. Now, this looks like the wheelchair would be sticking out, but it's a little bit of an optical illusion. It actually fits really nicely in the rows, and they've got about 4 or 5 or 6 of them throughout the sanctuary, and they blend in with the color scheme of the chairs. And it's saying if you use a wheelchair, there are several places that you can sit. You don't have to sit up front, or you don't have to sit in the back. What else should we be doing? Always use microphones. David, always, even if you've got a big booming voice like you do, always use microphones, especially if it's, if it's in a sanctuary and it's a large group. You know, so many people will go, I don't need a microphone, but people can't hear you no matter how loud you might be screaming. Encourage speakers, worship associates to speak loudly and clearly. I don't hear that well. I probably need a hearing aid. But I haven't, Janet agrees. I haven't, gotten around to checking it. No, I don't care about wearing a hearing aid. I mean, that would be fun. I just haven't had time to check it out. So I go, what?
Yeah.
But I know that I could be in my home congregation and the worship associate will be talking, and then they'll get to the end of a sentence. And I didn't hear the last 4 or 5 words. So we need to train people to speak clearly and distinctly and loudly, especially ministers. Raise the pulpit if you can so that everyone can see. So if someone uses a wheelchair and they're either preaching or making an announcement or whatever, they're high enough so that people can see them. Carol, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say we have a person who's hard of hearing in our on our board.
Yeah.
And it happens just about every meeting. We get 2 conversations going at the same time, and it drives this man nuts because he can't focus on what the conversation is, which one is the most important.
Yep.
So people need to think about that.
Absolutely. It really is an issue of raising your consciousness. I served on a board one time, and one of the members of the board was deaf, but she could read lips. So we needed to make sure that we were facing her when we were talking. And sometimes we'd forget, and she would gently remind us. And we had to raise our consciousness. We had to become aware of the fact that we have to communicate differently than what we're used to doing. And that's what this is all about. It's a hassle. It's an inconvenience. It means we're going to have to do things differently. But we've done that with other groups that are marginalized. Why not this one? Make sure there's accessibility to the pulpit so people with mobility limitations can speak or lead the service. So if you've got a riser and it's possible to put in a ramp, you need a lot of space. And a number of congregations, I've noticed and I've said, can't you work this out? And they said, we looked at it and the ramp would go like all the way, to the back of the room. There's not enough room. Again, I understand that, but at least have that conversation and see if it's possible to do that. So that if somebody, again, is preaching or making an announcement, they don't have to do it from the floor. If you have no other option, that's a reasonable accommodation to do it from the floor, as long as they can be heard. It might be an undue hardship for the congregation to install a ramp. Again, under ADA, although churches aren't required, but we should be making reasonable accommodations unless it proves to be an undue hardship. there are many congregations that simply can't afford an elevator. Have a wheelchair or two donated and make it available. So if somebody comes in and they forgot their wheelchair, or they're feeling unsteady that day, and they have a stamina problem, yeah, here, we got an extra wheelchair. Have a seat. Let me roll you into the sanctuary. We're name tags all the time for people who have memory problems, like me.
Minister.
Yeah. I'm terrible with names. So we're named, and again, people will go, everybody knows me, I don't know what we need. So we don't just need to wear them for visitors, but we need to wear them for those people that have memory problems. And also, name tags should be the name should be really big. These names are too small. I can't tell that that's you, Paul, if I didn't know your name. The first name should be in giant letters so that people can see it from a distance. That's a nice name tag. How come yours are so much bigger than Paul's?
I don't know. Different district maybe?
Oh.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about church name tags, I've seen a trend of some churches to have non-verbal icons for committees. So like they have a hammer or a tool if you're on the, and that really helps.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Or a handshake for welcoming something that,
Yeah. The universal
not
symbol.
just their name, but exactly what you're going to.
Yeah. Yeah. Leave seats on the aisles for people who have difficulty moving in the aisles. Now this is really hard for me because I like to sit on the aisle, because I like to stretch out, and I also get claustrophobic if I'm in the middle or at the end of the aisle up against the wall. But this really makes a lot of sense. There may be people that can't walk over people's feet. So encourage people to move into the aisles. And record services and make them available. Often a CD can be created instantaneously, or have them available on your website, or hand out printed versions of the sermon. Think of all the different ways in which you can accommodate people with hearing and visual problems and mobility problems. And the more creative you are, the more the congregation will become aware that they need to start thinking differently. I want to spend just a few minutes for people with environmental disabilities, because this is a group that is growing in numbers. Symptoms can be debilitating, sometimes life-threatening. They commonly include severe dizziness, headaches, fainting, tiredness, burning or itching of skin and eyes, flu-like symptoms, emotional disturbances, and seizure disorders. So, and also people who have asthma, for example, if they're exposed to chemicals, it can exacerbate the problem. And if we're not paying attention to the more overt, obvious things, you can imagine that congregations aren't aware, most of them, of issues around people with chemical sensitivities. So prohibit vehicles from standing for periods of time with their motors running near the building. In my home congregation, we share space with a day program, and they've got a sign out front. It's not our sign, I wish it was, it's theirs. Although it applies to people in our congregation as well. And it says, please do not leave your engine idling when you go to pick up your child. Use unscented beeswax candles. Apparently it's the only kind that doesn't give off a scent. Keep the property near the buildings free of herbicides and pesticides, or post notices before and after treatment. Ensure that at least one restroom is free of air fresheners, deodorizers, and scented soaps. And hopefully that'll be the bathroom that is accessible. Have a designated fragrance-free area and a well-ventilated area of the sanctuary, and make sure that the area is wheelchair accessible. We don't do this. I know we don't do this. We did it at General Assembly 2 years ago. There was a fragrance-free section. I think there was one last year in Phoenix, although I didn't notice it. There was? There was. Good. And a lot more and more conventions are saying, please no perfumes or colognes. Consider silk flowers or organic flowers as an alternative to flowers with pesticides. Are you kidding me? We're not messing with that tradition. We've got live, fresh flowers in our sanctuary. Inform the caring committee, if you have one, of the special needs of people who have environmental sensitivities. Of course, they have to self-disclose. You can't go around asking people if they do. But if they do disclose it, then you need to make people aware.
And they have to be willing to stay and tell us.
What's that?
They have to be willing to stay and tell us,
Yeah.
not just experience something and then disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, or go and complain, or write to me.
Something.
Yeah.
A lot of times they just leave.
Yeah. Have maintenance staff and others become familiar with less toxic cleaning products and use them whenever possible. Make sure the building is adequately ventilated and aired out periodically. Remove mold, which is one of the biggest problems, and mildew from the building. And give advance notice when chemicals such as fluorides and pesticides are going to be used. Pretty simple stuff to fix.
Except not. It's not. It's a lot to remember for people who aren't used to thinking of it. So it requires, again, a culture change.
But I mean, logistically, this isn't like installing an elevator. You know, I mean, this is much less expensive and logistically a lot easier. But the culture thing, you're right. I mean, that's making people aware of it and motivating them to do it is a different story. Yes.
You mentioned,
Tom, did you?
I had a quick question.
Is it real quick? Because I'll give you the microphone if it's...
Were you going to talk about
The
elevators?
real quick question is, are people sensitive to fresh flowers, just flowers, regardless of pesticides?
Yeah, are people that have sensitivity to fresh flowers in general? That was the question. And the answer was yes. It's from the Bethlehem Baptist Church in Minneapolis. And I'm segueing now because what I did was I looked for websites that have specific disability ministers on their website that are really saying to seekers that we're aware of the needs of people with disabilities and we want to minister to your needs. And I know that you're having, this is, oh, by the way, this PowerPoint presentation will be on the Surge website. So you just have a couple of handouts from it that I thought might be most relevant, but the whole thing will be on the Surge website. So they have disability ministry, nursery care, one-on-one aids for children with disabilities, Sunday school inclusion. They have a Sunday morning gathering for adults with cognitive disabilities. Sunday school class for children with special needs. I don't know if that's an inclusive class or not. I hope it would be. So, you know, stuff that I don't see a lot in UU congregations. I mean,
where is that?
this is the Bethlehem Baptist Church in Minneapolis. Really cool stuff. This is the First Unitarian Society in Madison, Wisconsin. 2 years ago, when I was at General Assembly, I met a woman named Leah, who has cerebral palsy and several other disabilities. And she was working for her Girl Scout badge, but I forgot what they call it.
Religion and life.
Huh?
Religion and life.
No, it wasn't. She was with the Girl Scouts and going for her big badge, whatever that is.
Gold award.
Huh?
Gold award.
Yeah, okay, we'll go with that. And her project was to create a special needs page on the website. So this is Leah's stuff. And this is just the top half of it. She talks about parking and entrances and routes. And then this is the bottom half of it. Restrooms, vision, help, hearing, help, chemical sensitivities. This is a tab on the website that one can go to and get all the information they need for people with special needs. Really cool stuff.
First Unitarian Society of where was it?
Madison, Wisconsin.
Thank you.
We know that the number 2 way that people find out about us is through websites. So if I'm a seeker and I get on a website and I see that you've got this stuff, or at least that you're addressing issues around accessibility, even if I don't have a disability or I don't have a family member, boy, I'm going to be a lot more attracted to that congregation. And then this is the last page of Leah's website, children with special needs and questions, and then this is Leah demo. She did get her badge. Oh, here it is. Girls, yeah, it is a gold award. You knew that. Wow. She's a girl. So welcoming people into our congregations or keeping people in our congregations, people with disabilities, is not just about making physical accommodations. It's creating a welcoming environment. And again, there are people that will be more tolerant of physical inconveniences if they know that they're loved and welcomed and included in congregational life. It won't solve everything, but it'll certainly help. So just a couple of thoughts on that. Greeters need to greet everyone. There was a great video years ago, the 10 Commandments of working with people with disabilities, and it was all about etiquette and tips for working with people with disabilities. You know, like don't hover over somebody in a wheelchair, and or don't use the wheelchair, you know, as the proper that kind of stuff. And if somebody does come in who uses a wheelchair, or someone who comes in with a walker, you know, greeters need to make sure that if they're uncomfortable, that they're getting over that they're greeting every person equally. And not everybody has had an opportunity to work with people with disabilities, like many of us have. So greeter training should also include, what do you say, how do you respond to someone who has an overt disability? Ask if the person needs assistance and wait until they accept your offer. So often we want to rush and help somebody. What we need to do is ask, would you like some assistance? And if they say yes, great, help them. If not, no problem, I'm here if you need anything. Train greeters and ushers so that they know where available resources are and how to use them. Like the assistive listening device, we've got them in my home congregation, but there are greeters and ushers who don't know how to use them. So if somebody comes in and asks that, they're going to have to find someone else. We also have the lift, similar to what Margaret was talking about. It goes from, you know, the ground floor just kind of up half a floor. It works okay, but there are greeters that don't know how to use it. So they have to go find somebody who knows how to use the lift. It's kind of awkward for the person who's sitting there waiting to get onto the lift. What's your language? And, you know, there's a whole rap about people first language. There's a website called Disabilities is Natural. It's mostly geared towards children with special needs, but it's got great resources. It's Disabilities is Natural, either .com or .org. Kathy Snow is the owner of that website, and she's written a great article on people first language. And when new members join, ask in a sensitive and dignified way if any accommodations would enhance their participation in the faith community. Again, you have to have some evidence of it. You can't just ask every person who walks in, do you need to be accommodated? But if someone is having a little unsteady on their feet, or they come in and they're using a wheelchair, or they say to you, I don't hear well, you know, we need to be asking people, how can we better accommodate you in congregational life? A few words about including children with special needs in our classrooms and worship. Again, I'm just grazing the surface here. We have a responsibility to make whatever accommodations we can to welcome children with special needs into congregational life. Communication with parents is essential to understand the needs of the child and to learn ways to support the child, so parents need to be brought in as partners. And possibly the parent may need to be around in the beginning in order to coach staff. That obviously can't be a permanent solution. Parent has a right to go to the worship service just like any other parent. But we may need to ask the parent and draw on their experience and their expertise in the beginning. And for children or young adults that go to worship services, I don't know about you, but there have been several times in my home congregation when there was a crying baby in the back, and people will actually turn around. They'll be sitting like this, and they'll actually turn around and look for the crying baby. Or they'll go, they'll make those kinds of annoying noises. I'm more embarrassed by their actions than I am by the crying baby.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you know, the crying baby probably should not be there because it is disruptive, but the way that we respond to it is so disrespectful. But there may be people with autism, for example, or you know, people with different intellectual disabilities. When they hear music, they gotta move. We don't move very well as Unitarian Universalists, but dancing or moving around during a service is an acceptable way for people to worship. So maybe we need to provide a space for those folks where they can be in service. Maybe in the back if they want to move around, if they want to, you know, if they want to dance, if they want to move around, if they engage in rhythmic, perseverative kinds of movements in response to the music or in response to their own internal messages. They shouldn't be excluded. There should be a place for them. So where to begin? Form a disability awareness task force. All of you are committed to this. I don't have to sell you on this. You wouldn't be here if you didn't think this wasn't important. So what are you going to do about it? And maybe one of the first steps is to get together a task force. For God's sakes, don't call it a committee, because no one will join it. Make it a task force, people who are interested. And if you can, if you have people with overt disabilities, include them on the task force. And then begin to brainstorm on what it is that you can do. Conduct an accessibility audit. One of the resources that you have is a link towards an accessibility audit. There are so many of them. And then implement changes one step at a time. One little piece at a time to get the congregation behind you and then tackle another one. Is there anyone that has such a task force, a group that is looking at accommodation issues, disability issues? Yeah, you guys are doing that. I'm going to give Paul a moment, and then I just have a couple more things to say before we adjourn. We have about 5 minutes. Oh.
So there's two sort of conflicting things. This is more of a question for one side. People with disabilities don't want to be treated as they have disabilities. They want to be treated as whole human beings. The other side is we need to focus on this. Do any of you have experience with, I guess, with certainly with how you integrate people into a certain, is it good to have like a general disabilities focusing service, or is it better to just integrate people into broader issues and to just mainstream individuals as parts of a larger, so it's not?
Well, I'm just wondering, Margaret, our resident minister, I don't know if any of you or anyone else is a minister, what do you think about that? Is it, congregations have done worship services on mental illness, on a specific, which is really powerful. But
right.
What are your thoughts?
Well, because I'm thinking a lot about this right now. I think that integrating it into a general theme of radical hospitality, we just started a book study group on Peter Bloch's book, Community, the Structure of Belonging.
That's my favorite book!
It's such a good book!
I love it, I quote it all the time!
And it's downloadable to your Kindle if you don't believe that the whole I Empire is the evil empire.
What's the name?
It's by Peter Bloch, B-L-O-C-K, and it's Community, the Structure of Belonging. And it's about a radical approach to engagement and inclusion. And it's all about inviting people in and then helping them enter. But I'm thinking, what happened in our first session is we introduced it with the theme of radical hospitality. And for the people around the table, they had never heard of the notion of radical hospitality. And for them, a big step toward radical hospitality was actually talking to even people they knew at the coffee hour, much less people they didn't know. So just introducing these ideas, but I think that general approach of radical hospitality, or of hospitality, and then you take it into different areas. We're moving into a system of ministry teams rather than committees. And so I just tapped Tom and I said, would you serve on a ministry team on access and inclusion? And Sonia's been really working that issue in RE, and we've got a new membership coordinator, so I'm really pumped about this. This is good, but I think it is, ministerial leadership helps, because then you get it from the pulpit in different ways, but it also takes a seedbed of interest in the congregation so that people will step forward for it.
Sonia, you can make it real quick. I don't want to hold people up.
Yep, really super quick.
We only have a couple of minutes.
I would recommend using some of the same techniques that we're now learning from our multicultural teachers in denomination about engaging that sense of otherness in terms of hearing people's individual stories, avoiding the temptation to understand autistic people as the one autistic person we know. So engaging the individual stories, avoiding the danger of a single story.
Thank you. One thing I want to tell you that's going on, and then I just want to close with reading a really quick story. The Equal Access Group that I mentioned has a subcommittee that I'm a member of, and we have been working for the last couple of years on creating a certification program for congregations that want to be inclusive of people with disabilities. It's modeled along the Welcoming Congregation program, and we have about 10 or 12 congregations that have expressed interest in the pilot project, and we hope to begin that over the summer. So hopefully you'll be hearing more about it as we finalize this. And what we're hoping is we can lift up this program to the level of welcoming congregation so that everybody knows what it is, and people can be proud to have that distinction.
They would be inclusive congregations?
What's that?
They would then be inclusive congregations?
They would be congregations that have taken steps to be accommodating and inclusive of people with disabilities.
What are you calling them? What are you calling them?
We don't have a name for it yet.
Yeah,
We have a working title. The hardest part of this project has been coming up with a name. I wanted to call it the Mark Bernstein Project, but the rest of it. So, in his book, Year of Our Lord, Faith and Harmony in the Mississippi Delta, T.R. Pearson tells the story of Lucas McCarty, a young white man born with severe cerebral palsy who uses a wheelchair, but also gets around by walking on his knees with the help of knee pads worn over his blue jeans. He shouts and makes vocal sounds, but for the most part communicates through an electronic language device. Lucas became a member of the Trinity House of Prayer, a small, poor, African-American congregation. He was embraced by the congregation and was in no way considered out of place or disruptive. He even joined the choir. Pearson writes, "Without exception, Trinity's members treated Lucas with unstudied compassion. At no financial cost to the congregation, no special programs, no architectural alterations, they demonstrated that making people with disabilities, even severe disabilities, feel a part of them is within reach of every house of worship. Sometimes it's not about building a ramp, sometimes it really is about opening up your heart." May it be so.